My name is Yehonason Alpren, and I'd like to share with you an episode that happened to me and my wife several years ago. We were living in Yehonason in Jerusalem, and we received a call from a lady in the community, and she asked if we would be interested in taking a guest for Friday night at the meal on Shabbos. So I said, of course, why not? Someone would like to come for a meal. So she said, well, this lady is a little strange. So I said, well, what difference does it make if she'd like to come for a meal? She said, well, she used to be a nun. A nun? I never had an ex-nun at my Shabbos table. I was really excited. And I was fascinated to talk to this lady, the nun who had converted. She became a Jewish lady a year or two earlier. And I was amazed, I was intrigued to why a nun should convert to become a Jewess. And I told my wife before she arrived that the children at that time were little. And I said to her, usually we have a problem on Friday night keeping the children at the table. I said, but this Friday night, we're not going to send them out. But if, as usual, they get up and they run around and they go in and out, if they go out, we close the door and we sit with her, because I'd love to talk to this woman. So the lady came in. She was about 50, a serious-looking woman. You could see that she was an intelligent woman. And I made Kiddush, and she watched everything and didn't say much. True to form, the kids were little, and they ran around, and they went out, and I said, right, this time let's close the door. We sat in the room together, my wife and I, with the nun, and I said to her, I'm wondering if I could talk to you a little bit about your past. I mean, I'm fascinated as to why a nun should become a Jewess. So she said, I have no problems. I'd love to talk to you and explain to you what happened. This is what she said. She said that I lived the life of a nun for many years. I was very high up in the nunnery. She was quite an influential lady in the church. And I did everything that I had to do. I prayed, I believed, I did everything that the church told me. And part of my training was that I also had to teach the other nuns comparative religions. And I had to study a little bit about different faiths, Muslims and Hinduism and Judaism. And I looked into the Jewish religion, and I was amazed at how practical it was. That everything in the Jewish religion is given, and you're helped along a great deal. Meaning you know what to do with your money. You know how to celebrate. You know how to mourn. You know how to speak in society. And she'd studied a tremendous amount. And she said, in the course of all my lectures that I had to give to the other nuns, I saw that really there was nothing to compare. In the church, you're just told, but there really isn't anything practical to tell you how to lead your life. Certainly not for a nun. There's no married life. There's nothing. And I began to question and query, and I didn't get any answers. And eventually I gave up. And I decided I'm going to become a Jewess because it seemed much more practical. Now, this lady had studied a tremendous amount. It was remarkable how much. She even knew how to tie shoelaces, which we know in Jewish law how to put on the right, then the left, and to tie the left first. And she knew things. She knew laws of kashrus. She knew laws of Shabbos. She knew a great deal. And in all her studies, she had reached the point of where she said, it's enough. I was amazed. And what I'd like to do in these few minutes is to describe to you some of the points that we had in a discussion, which I questioned her further. And what she told me was fascinating, as from an outsider's view, and an intelligent outsider, of what she appreciated in Judaism, which led her to convert. The first, which we mentioned in our discussion, was that the Almighty in the church is quite removed. He's not really connected with life which goes on a daily basis. I remember in English poetry there's a line which says, God's in his heaven and all's right with the world, meaning let's leave him there, keep him up there, don't bring him down there. This affected her a great deal because she couldn't grasp the idea that V'atem hadveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem. You, the Jewish religion, it's a verse in Devarim, Deuteronomy, you are intimate, you are close with the Almighty. And that was quite startling to her. King David says it the best in Hallel, which we say on Rosh Chodesh and on Shabbos. Rom al kol goyim Hashem. Hashem is way above all nations. Al hashamayim kavoda. He lives in the heavens. That's for the nations of the world. But we, mi kashem Elokeinu, who is like our God? Hamagbihi lo shoves. He sits very high up. Hamashpili lirois. But he sees very low. He sees everything that's going on in the kitchen. He understands what's going on in the office. He's involved in a daily life. He sits very high, but his supervision and his observation go all the way down, right down to what's going on in a person's daily life. That was very important to her. She couldn't grapple with this concept in the church that the Almighty was so removed. He'd created all, but he doesn't manage, he doesn't supervise, he doesn't maintain. He's up in his court in his heaven without any connection here. I mentioned to her a famous observation, which is quite remarkable, made by the Vilna Gaon, that the words Kisei Kavodecha, your holy throne, says the Vilna Gaon, are mentioned twice in the prayers. After a person uses the bathroom, there's a blessing which is said, Asher yotzar es ha'odam b'chochma. He formed the man with great wisdom. V'galui v'yadua lifnei kisei v'raveidecha. And it's revealed in front of your holy throne, all the workings of the channels and the passageways inside a human body. The words kisei kavodecha, your holy throne, are also used to refer to the tekiah, the shavoim, and the teruah of the shofar. Lifnei kisei kavodecha. Said the Vilna Gaon, what is the lowest point of dignity of a human being, which he resembles an animal, is using the bathroom. Galui v'yadua lifnei kisei kavodecha. And perhaps the holiest and most precious moments in the Jewish calendar are the sounds of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. There's the bracket. There's nothing outside that. That contains all, from the bathroom to the shofar. It's all under his control. This, the nun found fascinating, and she said that was a very important point in her conversion, that the Almighty is very much connected. You live with the Almighty, and his domain and his supremacy and his sovereignty goes all the way down to everything that happens in our life. Let me bring to you another reference, which is brought out, which we say actually every Shabbos morning, and we describe the nature of the Almighty when he supervises the world. We explain as follows. The supervision of the Almighty. Mishamayim hibit Hashem. He watches and sees almost like in a panoramic glance from the heavens, like I suppose one would look at from the Empire State Building. But then the lens focuses more. Ro es kol b'nei Odom, and he sees every single human being. Now the lens focuses even more. Mimachoin shivtoi, from his great elevated throne, hishgiach el kol, he supervises el kol yoshvei haaretz, all the residents on the world. Hayoitzer yachad libam, who forms the hearts of men. Hamavin el kol maaseim, and understands to where an act will take you. It's in Tehillim, chapter 33, verse 11, 12, and 13. In other words, it's like a lens which focuses and is involved all the way down to an action and to where it will take you 20 years later. That's the enormous aspect of hashgacha pratis, of divine providence, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved in our lives. That she found was a remarkable turning point in her conversion, that he's involved in one's daily life. We then went on to discuss in great detail married life and the life of a husband and wife, which she wasn't married, but she made the following comment. One of the greatest problems that we have in Western society is the breakdown of married life, of the family. The family is not held together, and she found it very, very painful that the church was unable to solve the problem of the families, of keeping the family together as a unit. And the more she read and the more she observed, she found it in the Jewish religion, in the faith, the family is held tremendously together. And why? And we discussed that in great length. And we explained the following to her. Take John and Mary, who like each other, they love each other, and they live together. How long? Until the love continues. They love going on holiday together, watching movies together, eating together, and life together is a party, so long as the party remains and they still are fond of each other. Because if John happens to meet up with another Jill and Mary happens to find a Bill, then they'll split up and find somebody else. And that's very much the life in a secular society where there's no real marriage as such, but the fibre of marriage has disappeared to a great extent. Of course, there are exceptions, but there's nothing really binding them, holding them together, except the love, which they are really a loving twosome, so long as they remain a loving twosome. Take Avram and Sarah in a Jewish marriage, the way it's supposed to be. It's not a loving twosome. It's a holy threesome. It's not John and Mary at two ends and finding their way together, but it's a triangle. And in the middle is the Almighty. Ish ve'isha shchina shruya beineihem. A man and a woman live together with the Almighty. They create what's called a mikdash ma'at, a small sanctuary. It's not a twosome. It's a holy threesome. And as you grow closer together to the Almighty, you grow closer together. And that's the holy triangle. There's a third partner. It's not just a twosome. And that's a very significant aspect of growth in a family life, where you keep Shabbos together, or you give charity together, or the laws of Kashrus together, or the laws of Yom Tov together, or whatever aspect of the Jewish law, learning Torah. The growth pattern is not a growth on an individual basis. The husband and the wife grow in connection and intimacy with the Almighty. V'atem hadvekim, you are connected to the Almighty, and it's a growth, a personal growth in Judaism towards the Almighty, and that's where the marriage works. That's the unit of marriage. And that she found was fascinating, because there isn't that binding factor, that union in a secular marriage. It doesn't happen that way. She found it very disturbing, and she felt that that was one of the reasons why perhaps the marriage has broken down, the family life has broken down. We then went on to discuss a little bit further about children, and children are almost hardly ever drawn into the church. They found it very hard to keep them attached. They're alienated in a society which just has one materialistic pleasure after another, and it's hard to enthuse a child to have spiritual delight or spiritual entertainment. And she questioned, and she had answers to it, and we discussed it in great length. How is it possible that in the Jewish religion the children are held together, that there is a binding factor of growth inside the family, and the children, in Hebrew we call it chinuch habonim, education of children, and they're held together in the family? And I suggested the following. The greatest testimony which a Jew makes is Shema Yisrael. It's called Kabbalas Oil Malchus Shamayim, accepting upon oneself the yoke of heaven. We say it at the beginning of the day and the end of every day. First words in, last words out. It's really the whole nature of the fiber of a Jewish life, the concepts and the precepts which are brought down in Shema Yisrael, that Hashem is one. The second line, which begins with a vav, which means the word and it's not just an awareness, a theoretical, intellectual awareness of that there's one God, but v'yohavta, that's an intimate relationship, b'chol levavecha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol miyodecha, that a person is connected to the Almighty in love. There's a passion. It's not just a knowledge, an awareness, it's an emotion as well. The next verse, B'hoyu hadvarim ha'ele, and these words refer to the words of the Torah, Asher anochi mitzavocha hayom, show us that Judaism is by no means just an armchair theory that you believe or you don't believe, which is the first line. The second line isn't an emotional, but the third line, and these words should be on your heart, means a growth, a perpetual growth, growing in Torah, an ability to internalize the Torah, al levavecha, like the laws of Shabbos, or the laws of marriage, or the laws of Yom Tov, or Kashrus. They're internalized, that a person believes in them and doesn't just practice them. We're not supposed to be robots practicing the laws of Kashrus, the laws of Shabbos, but we're supposed to believe in them and be committed to them emotionally as well. Now, and this is the point which I brought out, which I think is so fundamental. The next verse is the source of educating children, the primary reference in all of the Torah of how a child should be brought up. Veshinantom levanecha v'dibarta bom. You should teach a child. Shinun means teaching a child to be accurate. Rashi explains that he should know this is kosher, this is treif, this is allowed, this is forbidden. These are laws and precepts. That's called shinun, accuracy, awareness, precise in the laws. V'dibarta bom, and make it into a conversational piece. You talk about Torah, you talk about Hashem, you talk about mitzvahs, you talk about growth. V'shivtecha b'veisecha, when they're sitting having their children cereal in the morning. V'lechtecha b'derech, you're going on a trip together. V'shachbecha, when they lie down, a bedtime story. V'kumecha, when they get up. It's a conversational piece. What is a conversational piece? Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the verse line, the awareness and the knowledge that there is one God. V'yohavta is the passion, the emotion. V'hoyu hadvarim, the third line, each is joined by a vav, which means it's a connection to each point. And finally, the growth in Torah leads to the ability to train a child. In other words, a parent in Judaism has training, not in graduate school, not in classes, but in belief. He might not have reached the point of commitment that he'd like to, but in order to reach the point of v'shinantom levanecha, which means educating children, you must first progress through believing in one God, be emotionally attached, third line, growth in Torah, and now you're capable, you're qualified, maybe more qualified, you could become more. We're all here to learn and grow. But the point is that this is the source of growth for children. And therefore, we discussed with a nun together that educating a child is not just showing him how to eat or how to play, or honesty and truthfulness and relationship between fellow man, but there's an implication of that I have a mission with all my knowledge which I have and awareness intellectually and emotionally in the Almighty, and that is fed into the child and downgraded into the education of a child. And I suggested that that's why there is success in the education of a child, because it's not just showing him rudiments of social convention or manners or how to play, how to share. There's much more than that. There's the responsibility of giving the child the tools of the awareness of the Almighty. And perhaps that's the combination of the family life where we mentioned that's the holy threesome, bringing that into the marriage and into the family. And that's where the growth comes. Not necessarily just from the bringing up the child, showing him how to dress, showing him how to eat at the table, but there's the religious conviction as well which comes with it, which is the reference in all of the Torah where it comes to educating a child. That was the second point, really. The first was the relationship that we have with the Almighty, which is the difference between, she said in the church, he's removed, he remains in the heaven. And according to King David, as we saw, and the different passages we brought from Tehillim, he's very much involved in the daily life. He's involved in the kitchen scene. But also the concept that the marriage is developed on that theme and the child is brought up in that theme. We went a stage further. And I think this was really a very important point which she picked up in our discussions, which we went on that long Friday night when we spoke. She had a great deal of knowledge. She was already converted, but the points came up in discussion, and one of the most important points was the continual growth. It's not as if you reach, for example, like in university, you have your degree, your MA, your PhD, so you're qualified, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're an architect, you're a scientist, and with your qualification you carry on, and there is continual education, but it's not as if it's a requirement. In Judaism, there's a continual growth. Your implication is that, it's interesting, the word is called a Talmid Chacham, which is a wise sage, really translated means a wise student. You're always involved in work in progress. You never really arrive. You didn't really qualify. You might be called a rabbi. You might be called a gaon, a great scholar. But in reality, the relationship of growth in Torah is perpetual. It's all one's life. That's a spring of youth. The ability to always be interested in growth and growing. Where do we learn that from? King David says in Psalms chapter 119, really he explains, it's a little bit like an autobiography of how he was able to grow so much in Torah as the king of Israel and lead the people. He says as follows, Tov ta'am vodas lamdeni, ki b'mitzvosecha he'emonti. I had a tam tov when I learnt. It means a good taste. Ki b'mitzvosecha he'emonti, and as a result, I believed in your mitzvahs. Yeshiva bochrim, people who study in yeshiva, call it something called, in Yiddish, a geschmack. It's enjoyable. You must enjoy your learning. Parents and educators must make the learning thrilling, stimulating, and inspiring. The process of growth is not just amassing facts. The purpose is not to become an encyclopedia, being aware of all the laws, but there must be an enjoyment in the learning, in the studying. David HaMelech said, I always had a tuv tam vodas, a good feeling, a feeling of achievement in growth in studying. Without it, one doesn't continue. That's the purpose behind all the teachers in the yeshivas when they're teaching their students. There should be a geschmack, an enjoyable. You enjoy the svara, the thought, the logic, the deduction behind it. I remember when we were first married, And I came to study. I used to be a lawyer in London, and I said to my fiancée when we were going out that I'd like to sit and study in yeshiva for 2 years when we first get married. I'd been there since the last 34 years in the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim, but that's another story. But the point was that I wanted to come and sit and learn. And we came when we were first married to live in Jerusalem, and I studied in the Mir Yeshiva, and I'm still there in the Kollel. I give shiurim, but I'm still there studying in the Kollel. And my wife had a cousin who lived in Rehov Keren HaYesod in the middle of Jerusalem. And we went there for a Shabbos meal. I was just married, maybe a year or two after marriage. And sitting across from me at the table with his cousins was an accountant from Flatbush, his 50s. The man turned around to me in the middle of the meal, and he said to me, young man, where are you studying? So I said, I'm studying in the Mir Yeshiva. He said, what are you studying? So I said, well, I'm studying Baba Metzia, laws of civil law. Tell me what you're studying. And he was very abrasive. He was American. All Americans are very abrasive. He was very rough with me. I told him what I was learning. So he reached over to me, and he grabbed me by the lapel. He said, now you listen to me. I said, I'm listening to you. He was rough. He said to me, when I was a teenager, I went to a yeshiva on the east side, and I had a Rebbe. Now this Rebbe always, every single shir, brought down the questions on the Gemara from Rabbi Akiva Eger. And he threw out this question, and we all screamed and shouted and fought about it, and everybody thought what the answer was. And then the Rebbe told us what the answer was. It was fabulous, he said. It was stimulating. Because of that Rebbe and the questions which he brought in the shir, in the lesson, all my life, I've never let a day go past when I don't study Torah. It was as if he was telling me he had gasoline for life. He then turned around to me comically and said to me, if you study the questions of Rabbi Akiva Eger on the Gemara, you'll become great in Torah, just like me. But he was clearly a light. He was inspired with his Torah. That's what we explained to the nun. That's what King David meant when he said, I had a tam tov, a good taste. It's critical. It's everything for the success in growth in Torah. And that, we explained to the nun, is a fundamental part of this aspect of growth close to Hashem and understanding the Torah and the inspiration where it all comes from. Maybe if I have the ability, I'll share with you another story which happened once when we went, my wife and I, on a trip to the Galil, touring around Israel together, and we came back through Tzfas. And we went into a store together once. And as we walked in the door, the proprietor turned round to me and said to me, Adoni, ata ra'ita et hamezuzah sheli al hadelet? Mister, did you see the mezuzah on my door? אמרתי, כן, אני ראיתי את זה. אני אוכל כשר. I said, wonderful, very good. אני שומר Shabbat, I keep Shabbos. And he was telling me with great pride, and it was interesting to hear, that he'd found his way back to Judaism, and he was telling me all the things that he was doing. And being a cynical Englishman, I was listening to him, but one thing I noticed he never said. I said, אני הולך להתפלל עם הבן שלי, I go and pray with my son in shul on Shabbat. אמרתי, כן, יפה מאוד. But I said to him, אבל אתה לא לומד תורה. You didn't tell me that you study Torah. And his face changed, it dropped. He became pale. I said, אני לא לומד תורה. I don't study Torah. אמרתי, למה? Why not? הוא אמר, לא, אני לא לומד תורה. Why not? He said to me, my ear still stings from Baba Kama. He had a teacher when he was young. He grew up in Meir Sharim, who beat him across the head when he didn't say the right thing in the class. He ran away and lived in India for years, eventually came back and began to keep all the laws of Judaism, Shabbos and Kashrus and prayers. He told me in mezuzah, but he said, I cannot open a Gemara because my ear begins to sting. His teacher has full responsibility. Can't do that to a child. A child has to enjoy. He has to feel the geschmack. It's enjoyable. He's growing. Tov tam v'das lamdeni. If I have a good taste, ki b'mitzvosecha hemonti. The nun heard these stories. She picked up the point. She realized what it means, really, the growth. She'd already made her commitment. She had converted. But she said, these points are not found in the church. This intimate relationship which there is inside the Jewish religion. The whole stable fiber of married life is based on the commitment with a third partner. It's a triangle. It's not a happy twosome or a loving twosome. It's a holy threesome. It's loving as well, but it has to be with a threesome. And that's the basis of the child, who's brought up on the Kriyas Shema, on the third posuk, which reaches Chinuch Bonim, educating the children, and that's where it all comes in. And on that basis, our person grows and continually grows with a tam tov, with a good taste on the mouth. These are the tools which the nun picked up on. They're the lessons which we learn of how a person grows, becomes committed, and begins to eventually find his way with great delight and great commitment to Torah and mitzvahs and all aspects of serving the Almighty. Thank you.